In the dusty border town of Loma Roja, stories clung to the air, thicker than the red clay dust that coated every porch rail and whiskey glass. Folks there had a habit of naming things they feared, as though a label could keep danger at arm's length. And no name carried more weight, more spit-choked dread than the beast in the sack. You couldn't walk into Partners' saloon without seeing heads turn whenever the tale drifted to the surface. Even the piano player's hands would hover over the keys, frozen mid-note, waiting for the conversation to settle like a rattlesnake coiling in the dark. The regulars would hunch in close, speaking the way people do when they want to pretend they're fearless. Loud enough to hear themselves talk, quiet enough to convince themselves the thing couldn't hear them. "Beast'll take your soul clean out of your chest," old Nestor would rasp between sips of warm rye. "Or swallow you whole," muttered someone else. But no matter how many versions spun through the room, they all pointed toward the ridge outside town, where a massive burlap sack hung from a crooked mesquite tree. Some said the wind made it sway. Others claimed something inside it pushed back. Most people crossed themselves and stayed far away. A few fools rode near it, dared by liquor or pride, but none stayed long, enough to inspect the sagging shape or question why the rope holding it looked older than the tree itself. Except for Buckhalter Buck Reeves, Buck was known around Loma Roja for his height, tall, enough he had to duck through most doorways, and for the quiet way he moved, as though he carried storms inside him but preferred not to let them loose. His hat was always tipped low, shadowing eyes that had seen more than he ever talked about. He wasn't a man who believed in curses or ghosts. He believed in horses that needed shoeing, fences that needed mending, and folks who needed help but were too proud to ask. Still, even Buck felt something tighten in his chest when he glanced toward the ridge. The stories had soaked into the very soil, into the wind, into the way people avoided the horizon on moonlit nights. But unlike the others, Buck wasn't afraid of the sack. He was curious, and in Loma Roja, curiosity was far more dangerous than fear. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment the sky over Loma Roja was a pale, sun-bleached blue, and the next it was a bruised, roiling mass of clouds that growled at the earth like something hungry. Buckhalter Reeves had been riding the northern fence line when the wind shifted so sharply it felt like a hand shoving him toward the ridge. His horse, a stubborn roan named Cricket, tossed her head and snorted uneasily. Even she knew what lay in that direction. Buck patted her neck, a steadying thump of reassurance, though he felt the same unease building under his ribs. "Easy, girl. We'll just turn round this wash and—" Then he saw it. Through the sheets of rain slanting across the ridge, the sack was moving. Not swaying with the wind, not bumping gently like a loose signboard, struggling. Buck stopped dead. Cricket stamped nervously, trying to turn away, but Buck's attention had already locked onto the burlap shape dangling from the mesquite tree. It jerked in sharp, unnatural motions, movements that looked like panic, like breath caught in a body too terrified to stay still. Lightning cracked overhead, stabbing the sky with white fire. The sound spooked Cricket enough that she bolted, tearing the reins from Buck's grasp. He didn't chase her. Couldn't, his boots rooted themselves to the ground as if refusing to let him be anywhere else. Another violent jolt hit the sack. A muffled sound slipped through the storm, too soft to be a scream, too desperate to be the wind. Buck walked toward it. Every instinct he'd honed as a ranch hand, fighter, wanderer, and sometime fugitive told him to turn back. Every story he'd ever heard shouted the same warning. But Buck was not a man ruled by fear. If something was suffering up there, beast or otherwise, he wouldn't stand by. As he climbed the ridge, the shape inside the sack curled inward, trembling so violently the whole tree shook. Buck reached it, bracing his forearm against the whipping storm, and pressed one ear close to the coarse fabric. Inside, between shallow breaths, came a whisper, thin, pleading, human. "Please don't let them find me." Buck's blood ran cold. Not from fear, from realization. The beast in the sack was no beast at all. For a long moment, Buck simply stood there, rain sliding down the brim of his hat, dripping from his coat, soaking into his boots. The voice inside the sack had been faint, so faint he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. But then it came again, a trembling breath threaded with fear. "Please." That was all he needed. Buck drew his Bowie knife, its blade catching a flash of lightning, and sliced through the rope with one clean stroke. The sack dropped heavily to the ground, landing with a thud that made something inside whimper softly. Buck knelt, ignoring the mud that swallowed his knees, and pulled at the burlap knot sealing the top. They were tight, too tight, like someone tied them with the intent to never let them be undone. It took brute strength and a wedge of the knife to turn the last knot loose. But eventually the sack gaped open. A pale hand emerged first, trembling violently, then a face, exhausted, gaunt, streaked with dirt and tears. Not a monster, not even close. She was a woman, young but worn by the sort of fear that etched years into a person's expression. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks in wet strands, and her breath hitched painfully as though every inhale came with a cost. Buck immediately shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She flinched at the touch, shrinking back like she expected a blow. But when she met his eyes, something in her hesitation softened. "My name's Buck Reeves," he said gently, keeping his voice low and even. "I ain't here to hurt you." The woman swallowed hard, her throat working as she tried to speak. I thought they sent someone to finish it," she whispered. "Finish what?" She hesitated, then pulled the coat tighter around herself, her gaze darting toward the darkness beyond the ridge. "My name is Marisol," she said finally. "I'm a healer. Or I was, until the sickness came, until they decided I caused it." Buck felt his jaw clench. Lomaroa had always been a place quick to blame shadows for their misfortunes. "They called me cursed," Marisol continued, voice shaking. "Said I was a danger. They put me in the sack so the desert could take me, so no one had to get their hands dirty." Buck exhaled slow and deep, anger simmering hot in his chest. "You ain't cursed," he said. "Just wronged." Marisol blinked up at him, stunned by the certainty in his tone. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, her shoulders eased just a little. And Buck knew, getting her out of that sack was only the beginning. By the time Buck guided Marisol down the ridge and toward Loma Roja, the storm had broken apart into a thin, reluctant drizzle. The clouds hung low and heavy, like they too were waiting to see what would happen when the town finally had to confront what it had done. Buck walked slowly, letting Marisol lean on his arm. She fought every few steps not to collapse, her legs weak from days cramped inside that sack, but she kept moving. Pride or survival pushed her forward. As they reached the main square, the morning shutters were just beginning to open. A shop door creaked. Someone muttered a prayer. Heads turned, first out of habit, then out of confusion, then out of pure, frozen disbelief. "Lord above," someone whispered. "That's the beast's sack coat." "Is that?" "No, it can't be." Buck stopped in the center of town and faced them all. Marisol stood beside him, wrapped in his coat, hair clinging to her face, skin pale but unmistakably human. The sight cracked the murmur into a full-blown uproar. The sheriff shoved through the gathering crowd, boots splashing in puddles, his hat already tipped back in indignation. Sheriff Garrity was a man built on authority and fear, the kind who never apologized because he believed the word didn't apply to him. "What in hell do you think you're doing, Buck Reeves?" he barked. "Bringing that back here?" He jabbed a finger toward Marisol, who flinched. She should have stayed in that sack where she belonged. Buck stepped between them, towering, immovable. His voice was low, but the edge in it could peel bark off a tree. "She's done nothing but try to help this town. Y'all strung her up, like a monster because you were too scared to face your own shadows." "She's cursed," Garrity insisted. "Ever since she showed up, folks got sick." "And how many did she save before that?" Buck shot back. "Or did you forget?" The sheriff opened his mouth, but a small voice cut through the tension. "Sheriff, my boy's burning up." It was Mrs. Hargill, holding her feverish son against her chest. His skin was flushed, breathing shallow and rapid. She looked at Marisol with desperate, trembling eyes. "Please, can you help him?" Marisol hesitated only a second before kneeling beside the child. She touched his forehead. Her hand glowed faintly with warmth, not magic. Human kindness, human skill. The boy's breathing steadied. The fever's fire receded. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Fear cracked, awe seeped in, and the town of Loma Roja could no longer pretend the beast in the sack had ever been anything but the truth they refused to see, a woman they had wronged. By the next sunrise, Loma Roja felt like a different place. Not healed, no place ever healed overnight, but quieter, humbled, like a wild horse learning the touch of a patient hand. Word spread fast about Marisol saving the Hargill boy. By dawn, townsfolk trickled toward Buck's small homestead at the edge of town. carrying whatever their uneasy consciences compelled them to bring. A loaf of bread wrapped in a clean cloth, a jar of honey, a patched blanket, a handful of fresh eggs. No one said the words "we're sorry," but guilt hung off every bowed head. Every hesitant offering, Marisol accepted each gesture with a soft nod, though her eyes held a mixture of gratitude and hurt that made Buck clench his jaw every time he saw it. She stood in his doorway that morning, wrapped in borrowed clothes and sunlight, watching the townsfolk retreat. When the last one had gone, she let out a breath that trembled at the edges. "Do you think they mean it?" she asked quietly. Buck leaned against the porch post, arms crossed, watching the road. "Mean what?" "Their forgiveness." He shook his head. "Forgiveness ain't something folks hand out like biscuits. Takes time. Takes courage. Same as asking for it." Marisol looked down at her hands, the ones they'd once bound, now free and steady. "I don't know if I want to stay here," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know where else to go." Buck studied her a moment. The desert wind tugged at her hair, the morning light painting her face in gold. He saw not the frightened woman who had stumbled out of the sack, but someone strong enough to survive cruelty, gentle enough to heal the very people who wronged her. "You don't have to decide today," he said. "Or tomorrow. Or ever if you don't want." He paused, clearing his throat. "And you don't have to go anywhere alone." Marisol lifted her gaze. "And you? Where would you go?" Buck smiled, small, lopsided, genuine. "Reckon I'll go wherever I'm needed. Seems today that's right here." She stepped closer, placing her hand atop his. Her touch was warm, unexpectedly so, and Buck felt something shift inside him, something quiet and steady settling into place. "You saved me," she murmured. Buck shook his head gently. "All I did was open a sack. You saved yourself. And maybe," his voice softened, "maybe you saved me a little too." For the first time since arriving in Loma Roja, Marisol smiled, bright and real. And Buck Reeves, the giant cowboy who had never found a home in any town or any heart, realized he'd finally found both, right where she stood,